We're traveling down Highway 90, the road most traveled, the strip of blacktop that knits together the music and culture from Houston to Jacksonville. I'm Kip Lornell of George Washington University, and this time we're stopping in Alabama to talk about the music of gospel quartets. You may not think about gospel music outside of the church, but the fact is that the roots of much of today's hip-hop, rap, pop music of all kinds is found not only in the church, but in gospel quartet music in particular.
Just came knocking at the gambler's door. Looky here, gambler, are you ready to go?
Black gospel quartet singing really started in this country at around the turn of the 20th century. There was a very strong tradition in the black community, both singing in churches in quartets, but also, perhaps even more importantly, singing at barbershops, singing at your workplace. And a lot of the quartets that developed at the turn of the century in places like Birmingham, Alabama, Tidewater, Virginia, were actually built around workplaces more so than they were around the churches that people attended on Sunday.
Moved on down dirty stream. Water kept moving up around my feet.
For the past 60 years or so, one of the best-known black gospel quartets in the country has been the Blind Boys of Alabama.
Looked over Jordan, and I saw Jesus.
This is Clarence Fountain, the lead singer from the Blind Boys, way down in Alabama. Well, you know, way back a long time ago, they had two groups of singers. One was from Mississippi and one from Alabama. And the man in New York had a contest. And what he did, he said, we're going to have a contest, and we're going to have the Blind Boys from Alabama versus the Blind Boys from Mississippi. And so we lost. But it was good, and it came out fine for us. So 1944, we hit the road, and we never looked back.
Play that thing, boy.
We had a radio, and the thing we did, we listened to music every day at 4 o'clock, and they played nothing but Golden Gate Quartet records, and that's how we learned how to really sing, because the Golden Gate was a great quartet.
Get on board, better get your ticket now, my Lord, cheap. Wow, wow.
You never heard them, but in that day, they were big. They were on CBS radio, you know. And back, if you were that popular and you could get on the radio and on a network, man, that was that. And singing gospel music, oh, that was you were great.
Now people, she enters the pearly gates of heaven. Can't you imagine that you can hear this train go?
The harmony they had, and they were speaking their words very clear. So that gave us the idea that we could do the same thing, you know. So that's how we learned how to sing.
Well, it didn't rain, children. God's gonna send the water from Zion, and he's gonna raise his heaven up higher. It's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, well, it's gonna rain, children.
The Golden Gate Quartet was a very innovative group. They began in the 1930s in Tidewater, Virginia, and they added a couple of new elements to gospel singing that had never been heard before. One was the emphasis on a really strong, pronounced pumping bass, which provided both the bass line and a very particular rhythm. And the second was kind of a sung and spoken lead vocal. And Willie Johnson, who was the leader of the Golden Gate Gospel Quartet, was the man who really put these elements together. And when they started to perform on radio and make records in the 1930s, people had to attach a name to this new style of quartet singing, and they called it Jubilee.
My Lord, then it rained 40 days and nights without stopping. Noah was worried when the rain kept dropping.
Singing Jubilee, let me explain it to you. It's the same thing as rapping, what the rappers do now. The only thing is, when you sing Jubilee, you're rapping in tune.
My Lord, then the wind did blow, the ark did rock. Noah couldn't find nowhere to dock. My God spoke, whispered low, showed old Noah where he wanted him to go. He said,
the Golden Gate Quartet, they were the author and the finishers of Jubilee. And they could sing Jubilee better than anybody I ever heard.
It's gonna rain.
Brothers and sisters, I want you to know there's a man, he's gonna take your name.
Today, rock and roll music is so ubiquitous we just take it for granted. But if you want to go back to the roots of rock and roll, you really have to go back to 1906 to the Azusa Street Revival in Los Angeles. This was a Pentecostal movement in which both blacks and whites got together, and if we were able to go back on our Wayback Machine to 1906, we would have seen a lot of the same kind of performance elements in the Azusa Street Revival that you see in a rock and roll stage today. You would see a lot of interaction between the people who are participating and the people who are up on stage. The other element that kind of carries forth in black gospel music that affects rock and roll would be the very dramatic vocal styles. That kind of very dramatic singing that you hear in rock singers in the 1960s and 1970s comes directly from the church. And of course, rhythm and blues, which was the kind of black forerunner to rock and roll, which developed in the 1940s, was exactly the kind of music that people like Elvis Presley were listening to on WDIA, which was the first black-operated radio station in Memphis in 1948.
There ain't no different in gospel and rock and roll. I'll give you an example. There's a man going around taking names.
There's a man going round taking names, Lord, taking names.
I got a woman way old town, she's good to me.
I got a woman way over town that's good to me. Oh, yeah.
Would make rock and roll what it is and make gospel what it is. We talking about Jesus and they talking about my woman, my baby. I love her and she's mine, you know, all that old mess. But it all comes out the same way. In rock and roll, you can put the same feeling in rock and roll as you can in gospel. There's no difference.
She says loving just for me. Yeah, she loves me so tenderly. I got a woman way over town that's good to me.
Rock and roll was big and gospel was not. Now, we had many opportunities to go over and sing in the rock and roll field. Rock and roll had the day. And anybody who wanted, you could go in and sell 1 million records in 5-6 days, you know. That's where the rock and roll was. But we didn't. And of course, we made the Lord a promise that we wouldn't do this. So that's why we didn't do it. And the Lord blessed us real good.
It's so sweet. Oh, yes, it is to be saved.
The Blind Boys have always stayed in the gospel highway, and they've been supported by a very loyal black audience for many, many years. But in more recent times, really since the 1990s, a lot of white patrons and a lot of white music listeners have discovered the Blind Boys of Alabama. The Blind Boys have also been involved with kind of the evolution of gospel quartet singing since the 1950s as well. Groups like Blind Boys of Alabama have added electric guitars, electric bass, keyboards, and full rhythm section. A lot of the old-time Jubilee style singing, especially the bass singing, has gone away, replaced by the electric bass, but they still have that 3 or 4 part harmony and feature a lead singer. And this is just another example of how pop music today has been influenced by gospel quartets.
Can I dance? Can I dance?
Thanks for listening. I'm Kip Lornell of George Washington University for Arts Edge, a program of the Educational Department of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts.
Have y'all heard the news?